Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes till 3 o'clock when we get started with supported decision making. All right, we'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, thanks for joining us today. My name is Jody Hall. I am one of the parent trainers at Maine Parent Federation. I live in North Yarmouth with my family, my husband, and my son who has Down syndrome and ADHD, and my daughter. And we're going to be exploring the topic of supported decision making today. As a parent of a teenager who has a disability, this is something that I'm learning about not only professionally, but also personally. And looking forward to talking with you all a little bit more about what this framework looks like. The webinar today is being broadcast live on Facebook through Zoom, and it will also be archived on both platforms. If you are accessing this later or wanting to access it later, you can go directly to our Facebook page, and it will be saved under videos there. Additionally, you could go to our www.mpf.org page, and you'll find it under online trainings. There'll be a link there to it. All of the handouts are available at our website as well, and I encourage you, if you have not already downloaded those, to do so after the webinar. Additionally, at the end, real quick, there will be a poll that will pop up. If you could just click through, it's 7 or 8 quick questions, multiple choice, that would help us a lot. And any chat questions you have, comments, concerns, questions, any of that can be right in the chat box on Zoom, as well as the Facebook chat. And we have MPF employees monitoring those as well. So let's go ahead and get started. This page just explains that Maine Parent Information is an information and training center. We are not a legal service agency, so our job is to present accurate information to parents and providers to make informed decisions. This is our agenda for today. We're going to be looking at defining supported decision making, exploring alternatives to guardianship. We'll take a look at what it looks like to practice SDM. SDM is short for supported decision making. We'll also look at what the role of the supporter is and the types of support that they can provide. And we'll take a look at current law regarding guardianship and how to move forward from here. So it's important to define supported decision-making so moving forward we all have a good understanding of what this is. Supported decision-making is when a person with a disability exercises their right to make decisions for themselves while accessing a support network of their choosing. So this is not a legal agreement, but it is a model or a framework in which the individual with the disability is at the center of it all and the person who is making the decisions about their lives. They then choose supporters to surround themselves with, to rely on for input and just to help in the decision-making process. In September of 2019, the Maine probate code changed surrounding guardianship laws. And so that is what has precipitated all of Maine Parent Federation's work about education for supported decision-making. Prior to 2019, the legislature had not really touched the probate code since the 70s. And so there's quite a big learning curve in terms of the changes that have taken place. At this point, language has been updated in the process of obtaining guardianship to say that an individual now must be deemed unable to receive and evaluate information or make or communicate decisions, even with appropriate supportive service, technological assistance, or supported decision-making. So these are all of the sort of caveats that are necessary in order to obtain guardianship for an individual with a disability. Additionally, instead of incapacitated individual, that's considered old language now. It now states that the individual lacks the ability to meet essential requirements for physical health, safety, or self-care because he or she identified needs cannot be met by protective arrangement instead of guardianship or less restrictive alternatives. So essentially, what this is saying is guardianship is no longer as easily granted. A person who is wanting to obtain guardianship must now explore less restrictive alternatives, and we'll talk more about that throughout this webinar, and that they must demonstrate to the courts that they have explored those other less restrictive alternatives, and the less restrictive alternatives are not a proper fit if guardianship is to be awarded. So less restrictive alternatives are defined as SDM, supported decision-making, appropriate technological assistance, appointment of an agent by the individual, appointment under a power of attorney for healthcare or finances, or appointment of a representative payee. And so these are all of the bits that must be explored during the stages of guardianship. And the three stages of petitioning for for pursuing guardianship are petitioning, visitor's report, and court order. There are three major principles of supported decision-making. The first one being everyone has the right to make choices. Regardless of ability or disability, everyone has the right to make choices. The second being people can get assistance without giving up the right to make choices. Just because someone may need help in making a decision, that doesn't automatically negate their ability to make a decision. So people can get assistance without giving up the right to make choices. And number three, people will often need help in understanding, making, and communicating their choices. Again, just because an individual needs help doesn't mean that they are not capable of making decisions for themselves about their lives. So in response to the change in the probate code and the updated laws on guardianship, Maine Parent Federation is providing outreach, education, and trainings to families, providers, and schools, assisting families to draft a supported decision-making plan, assisting families to include SDM in school IEP transition plans, as well as working with medical providers within an SDM plan, implementing SDM assistance into our Family Support Navigator program, and developing informational booklets as well as brochures. So we have actually been part of a 2-year pilot program with local families in Maine, in which we actually do 2-day trainings with them. And families will come, and most of them will bring their young adults, and we educate them about the framework of supported decision making. We will split the youth up and the parents up for part of the day, and the youth will work with our youth coordinator, Dylan Campbell, and learn more about self-advocacy, self-determination, and getting to know and getting very familiar with their strengths and weaknesses, so that they can understand what kinds of areas they might need support in moving forward. Additionally, the parents are then hearing from a number of different providers and experts, including adults who might practice supported decision making. And we spend the day educating them, and then our staff will pair up with them as support people over the next couple of months. And so over that time, we encourage families to further explore the idea of pursuing supported decision making for their youth. We are then there sort of as their helpline and their one-on-one coaches if they need anything. And then after a few months, we get back together and sort of evaluate where they are, answer any questions, and get feedback on how the training has gone, since it is a pilot program. Our Family Support Navigator program, which is our peer-to-peer parent program, those navigators are also trained to now go out and meet with other families who may not be part of the cohort, which I was just referring to, the pilot program, but to provide assistance to those families as they also explore supported decision making and writing plans for that. The booklets and brochures, which are mentioned at the bottom tab there, are actually part of today's handouts, so you can access those as part of the downloads. There's a booklet, I have one here, supported decision making, which is essentially today's webinar in summary format. And then there are a couple of brochures, one which is a quick reference card for supporters, and another which is a quick reference card for youth. This is a nice graphic, just a nice visual of we should always assume ability rather than disability. And know your strengths, weaknesses, and needs, which is really paramount in moving forward with supported decision making. It's impossible to sort of garner the right kind of support and input in your life if you're not quite aware of what your needs and weaknesses are. Additionally, it's always great to know your strengths and to know where you can really stand on your own. Here are some terms to know as we work our way through this. Guardianship is a legal process by which a court takes away the right and power of an individual to make decisions and enter into a legal relationship because they are deemed incapacitated. Supported decision making is a person with a disability makes their own decisions by using support networks to help understand the issues and choices, ask questions in language they understand, and communicate their own decision to others. Releases are an agreement between a provider and the individual receiving services to allow the provider to release and/or communicate with a third party. Probably any parents on this webinar are very familiar with that. Anytime you want any agencies or providers to talk with one another, you know, we all sign those releases. Power of attorney, a person knowingly and voluntarily signs a legal document that identifies someone they trust to act for them. Representative payee, this is the Social Security Administration appoints someone to manage a person's Social Security benefit. And advanced healthcare directives, when a person has a family member or natural support who can make healthcare decisions which the person cannot make even with support. And we're going to explore each one of these a little bit more in depth. Looking at guardianship, again, that's the legal process where the court takes away the right or power of an individual to make their own decisions. So the guardian is then appointed all of the power to make any of the decisions. This transfer of power or guardianship can be made at the age of majority, which is 18, or any time after that. So if someone is found competent at age 18 and able to make their own decisions, but later on at age 29 is showing they need more assistance, then someone may petition for guardianship at that point as well. Obtaining guardianship is a very serious step which significantly restricts a person's individual rights and freedoms. And so it really does need to be sort of last resort after the less restrictive alternatives have been explored and then found to be an inappropriate match for the individual. It's up to the probate court to determine whether or not guardianship is an appropriate. So looking at types of guardianship, we have full guardianship, which that's obviously the most restrictive type. So that's all legal rights are then transferred to the guardian. And that would include, you know, all the decisions, making any decisions in the financial areas, education, living, relationships, really health, money, all of it. So full guardianship means the individual is not making any of those decisions on their own, that somebody else does have the right to make decisions for them. Limited guardianship is where some people are able to make reasonable life decisions in some areas, but not in others. So this is a great sort of combination then. Speaking personally for a minute, my son absolutely hates anything in the medical world, and he has medical needs that will regularly need attention. And he's only 15 right now, so he's got a little maturing to do, but he probably won't get to the point by the time he's 18 where he will be able to make sound medical decisions. And so I envision that my husband and I will need to petition for limited guardianship, at least in the area of medical decisions for my son. That being said, my son has the capability to make some sound decisions in other areas of his life. And so we would not want to go for full guardianship because I wouldn't want to restrict his rights in those other areas. So limited guardianship can be applied in very specific ways to individuals as they're appropriate. Lastly, there's temporary guardianship, and this is used only in the event of an emergency, and it's so emergent that it happens without even going to probate court and having a hearing. So this is when there's been a sudden emergency and somebody needs to act temporarily as the guardian, or the current guardian has had some sort of emergency and needs to be replaced immediately as well. It is not a long-term setup. Power of attorney. The power of attorney, referring to the agent here, is the one who handles the person's affairs in a manner which is agreeable to the individual and their best interest. So this is something that an individual elects or chooses to do. They choose the person who they would like to be their power of attorney, and they may also revoke that right if they are unhappy with the decisions that the agent makes on their behalf. It's important to note that signing a power of attorney does not mean an individual is giving up their rights to make financial, property, health, or any other decision on their own. But it does mean that someone can make a decision if they are asked to by the individual or the individual is unable to do so. There are a lot of power of attorney agreements floating around online. We definitely encourage you to consult an attorney. Many of those online forms don't provide full or appropriate protections. And so we would encourage you not to rely on those, but to definitely consult an attorney. Power of attorney can also be used during an interim period while waiting for other arrangements to become legal. For example, guardianship. The guardianship process may take a while, and during that time, POA, power of attorney, can be used. Representative payee. This is the person or organization who is appointed by the Social Security Administration to use the Social Security benefits to pay for current and future needs of the beneficiary. This is required, and so duties include keeping records of all payments received and writing reports about how they've been spent, properly saving any benefit which was not used to meet current needs, and reporting any changes that could impact the beneficiary's payments. So the representative payee is not the same as an authorized representative, a power of attorney, or holding a joint bank account with the beneficiary. If someone is appointed full guardianship, they must additionally be appointed representative payee through the Social Security Administration, because they're two separate things. And regardless of whether or not an individual has a guardian or they maintain their own sense of control, there's still a process for applying to be a representative payee, but the individual may be their own representative payee. The application must be done in person at the Social Security office. I don't know if there's any sort of updated information on that just right now in the quarantine, but typically that's how it's done. And the form is called an SSA 11. Advanced Healthcare Directive. It's a legal agreement which allows a specific person to make healthcare decisions on behalf of another, should that individual be unable to do so on their own. So this is comes into effect if there is a sudden illness, or if the individual is suddenly found incapable of making solid decisions. These are floating around pretty much at every doctor's visit you go to. I know my doctor always checks in with me at my yearly physical to see if I have one. There's a link there in which you can find the form. The form must be signed and dated by the individual and 2 witnesses. It does not need to be, you don't need to have an attorney involved. It's not a legal proceeding. But once the form is completed, it's really important to make sure that it gets in the hands of everybody who really needs it. So everyone on a healthcare team, family members, hospitals, providers, all of that really needs a copy of that. It can be known by other names as well: living will, personal directive, advanced directive, medical directive. In Maine, it's considered life-sustaining treatment choices. And again, this is widely found. And that brings us back to supported decision-making, SDM, which is a series of relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements designed to assist an individual with a disability to make and communicate to others decisions about their life. So we really have all used supported decision-making. Anytime we make major life decisions, we consult people who are trusted, who are close to us. We rely on them for their input and their advice. And really, it's just natural to ask others for help. So that's sort of at the basis, that's what supported decision-making is. Who can benefit from supported decision-making? Anyone. It's a model which honors the individual's goals and decisions, even if they have a guardianship arrangement as a safety net. It's a fantastic model for anybody who really wants to be independent and still needs some formal assistance in that. This is an activity that we do when we are with people in a webinar. We'll adapt, and I'll just sort of summarize for the, or when we're in person, sorry, I'll adapt for the webinar. But essentially what we do is we have people break up into groups of 3 or 4, and everybody gets assigned a role where one person is playing the role of the young adult, another is playing the role of a family member, another support person, and another maybe a financial agent or medical advisor. And the situation is that the young adult has decided to get a tattoo, but has not yet followed through on this decision. So they've come to their SDM team to determine what is needed to get the tattoo. One person will assume the position that the tattoo violates their values. And so then we ask everybody to have a discussion and role play about, what would that be like? Then we have everybody report back to us at the end. And invariably, each time we do this activity, a support person will report out and say, oh, well, when I was trying to convince the young adult to ... whatever it was. And every single time, we kind of have to remind people that actually this isn't about convincing the individual to do anything. The situation actually says that the adult has already decided to get a tattoo. And our role as support people is not to convince the individual to change their minds or make different decisions, but maybe to present new information and to make sure that the individual is really considering all sides of the issue. So I think, oh, sorry, I thought we had another slide that went with that. So for example, has the young adult thought about how they're going to actually be transported to get the tattoo? Do they have enough money saved up to pay for that tattoo? What about their employment, their place of employment? Do they have rules about tattoos not being visible? Those kinds of things. But the job would never be to convince the person to not get a tattoo. So again, in this role-playing scenario, we do have one person who we've stated the tattoo violates their values. So we always ask, what should that person do? And the answer is, if they can't support the individual without any kind of bias, then they really need to excuse themselves from that situation and allow the other support members on the team to provide the right kind of support. So in supported decision making, obviously there's an emphasis on less restrictive alternatives to guardianship, and supportive decision making being the very least restrictive. Appropriate technological assistance is another form, releases, and the appointment of an agent by the individual, including power of attorney, which we talked about. Less restrictive alternative is the approach which works to meet an individual's needs, using methods which honor an individual's right to choice and is less restrictive than conservatorship or guardianship arrangements. Okay, so applying for guardianship is a really big deal. In order to obtain guardianship, there are 3 stages to the process. The first being petition, the second being a visitor's report, and the third being court ordered. And supported decision making now must be considered and ruled out during the 3 stages of guardianship proceedings. The first stage, petition for guardianship, it is required to write a brief description providing the reason the guardian is necessary. So under those reasons, you would need to explain the nature and extent of the individual's needs, any less restrictive arrangement or alternative which already has been explored, a reason if less restrictive arrangements have not been explored, why, and also reason why those less restrictive arrangements are insufficient to meet the needs of the individual. The second step is the visitor's report. And so once the paperwork has been filed, the court appoints an individual to visit the person filing to be guardian and the individual on whose behalf they are filing. And then they write a report, which includes recommendations regarding the appropriateness of guardianship, whether a protective order or other less restrictive alternatives are available to meet the individual's needs, and if guardianship is recommended, whether it should be full or limited. Third is the court order, and this is the basis for guardianship, the basis for guardianship appointment is made through a court order and includes choosing a guardian or conservator for the individual who is an adult. If there is clear and convincing evidence that the individual lacks the ability to meet essential requirements for physical health, safety, or self-care, because, and then there's points A, B, and C under that. So even with the appropriate support services and technological assistance and SDM, the individual is unable to receive, evaluate, make, or communicate decisions. Additionally, the individual's needs can't be met with a protective arrangement or less restrictive alternative. And the appointment is necessary or desirable in order to enable the individual to meet needs for physical health, safety, or self-care. Secondly, choosing a protective arrangement or less restrictive alternative instead of guardianship or dismissing the proceeding. And third, establishing only those powers to the guardian which are deemed necessary to address the demonstrated limitations and needs of the individual. So this also encourages the individual's maximum self-determination and independence. So we never want to restrict rights in which an individual is capable of maintaining. Full guardianship may not be established if a limited guardianship, protective arrangement instead of guardianship, or other less restrictive alternatives would meet the needs of the individual. And this is so important because it's easier to start with an individual maintaining their rights and then sort of test that out and slowly maybe place some more limitations on their rights rather than start with full guardianship and restrict their rights and then try to add more freedoms back in. Let's look at SDM in practice. I personally love this graphic, this little visual off to the right of the screen, where the individual is in the center of it all and they're surrounded by the supporters. And there's the arrows, sort of the back and forth give and take, and together they all make one framework. And that's really what it needs to be. The individual needs to be at the center of it all. So SDM promotes independence by providing support, but not making decisions on behalf of the individual. You've heard me say that 10 times already today, and I'll say it 10 more times by the time this is over. That's really at the heart of it. Support does not mean taking responsibility or making decisions on behalf of the individual. SDM is flexible and it can change as needs change. What is working for a young adult at age 18 might not work when that young adult is 22. And so there's freedom to change the framework and the model as the needs change. A plan may be written in a supported decision-making agreement. If so, it's not a legal document. Nothing about this is a legal agreement. It is, like I said, a model or a framework for sort of setting an individual up for the best supported team success that they might need. And it's best to have a team of supporters so the duties are shared among multiple people. However, support can be provided one-on-one or within a team. So for example, if an individual needs some financial help and they have a supporter on their team who typically provides that assistance, they may not want to meet with the entire team to explore that one issue, but may just contact that person directly who assists them with the finances. Many individuals may be able to reach their maximum potential and live independent lives by using the supported decision-making model. Having a team of trusted people who can provide support and input about life decisions may be the only tool one needs to be successful. The supporters assist in the decision-making process, but the individual with a disability always makes the final decision. So individuals being supported can choose whoever they'd like to be on their team. They may choose family or friends or staff, but it's up to them to decide who they would like to provide their support. The individuals also determine what areas of support are needed. So how many members they might need will be determined based on the areas that they feel like they need support. Earlier, when I mentioned that our youth coordinator, Dylan Campbell, does workshops about self-advocacy with our youth, that's really important for exploring this particular point. You know, getting to know, getting familiar, thinking about the areas of support that a youth might need and who they might turn to for that support. Supporters will meet with the individual to determine what roles and areas of support they will provide. And the individual, it is their responsibility to communicate with the team what kind of support they need, how often they would like it, and what the best form of communication is like for them. The individual being supported is always able to change their mind. And this can include changing who they would like to support them. It's a flexible, fluid process that, again, can change throughout stages of life. We have a great video. I hope it plays. This is Garrett. He was one of the youth in our very first cohort for the supported decision-making pilot program. He and his mom, Tanya, were participants in it. And at the end of the year, Garrett and Tanya were practicing supported decision-making. So Dylan actually made this video. Let me see if we can get it to play. Let me see if it goes back. We'll try one more time. No, nothing was coming up. Okay, well, the video, we can post that to our Facebook page probably. It's also available on our YouTube channel. And it's a really nice real life example of someone who's practicing supported decision making. And in fact, Garrett is such a nice living example that we have now brought him back to help train the next cohort of youth about supported decision making. So I really encourage you to just take, 5 minutes and watch that video when you have a few minutes. Looking at self-determination. So supported decision-making is a fundamental part of self-determination, which allows individuals to assume greater responsibility and control. People who are self-determined are better able to appreciate their strengths while acknowledging their limitations, set personal goals which are challenging yet realistic, make appropriate choices and decisions, and advocate for themselves. This is all part of the self-advocacy workshop that I was talking about that Dylan does. And in fact, we can put the information up maybe in the chat box as well. Next Wednesday, Dylan is actually going to be presenting it, the webinar on self-advocacy via Zoom. So we have some registration links available for that as well. And self-advocacy, we're referring to the ability for someone to articulate one's own needs and make informed decisions about the support necessary to meet those needs. Looking at the role of the supporter. So the supporter's job is to recognize and give respect to the person being supported as the decision maker. Being a support person is not the same thing as being a parent. So sometimes family members, parents may not be the best supporters on the team because it's very easy for us as parents to want to step in and make a decision for our kids, but that is not the job of a supporter on an SDM team. Supporters should provide information and resources, but not make decision for the individual. So going back to the tattoo example from earlier, the youth had decided to get the tattoo, but the supporters were then able to provide information that maybe the individual had not thought of, such as, have you saved enough money to get the tattoo? Supporters should really commit to the role for at least a year. This is just so that everybody can kind of start to get into the groove and establish the rapport that's really helpful. And supporters should contribute useful information in a particular area in which they have expertise. So if a young adult has an uncle who works at the bank who happens to be really good in finances, then maybe he would want to ask his uncle to be his support person when it comes to finances. If he has a friend who, does well in business or something, maybe he'd want to ask that friend to be the support person when it comes to employment opportunities. So supporters should know which areas they're being asked to support in and provide information about that. Here are some more examples of areas to provide support. So we've got finances, work, legal matters, physical health, independent and community living, self-care, services and supports, social and recreational activities. And these are just some examples. So we've talked about who could be a supporter, and now let's look at the types of support. There are lots of ways in which we can help to support individuals who have disabilities and still allow them the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. One of the ways a supporter might do this is by providing plain language information. So providing written information in a way that an individual can understand. This is obviously different for each person. Also providing information that will suit one's needs. So providing info in the best way that an individual understands, including verbal communication or pictures. Knowing options, knowing all the available options for a specific situation. And visits and trials. So setting up different choices to see what fits best. Talking to experts and taking classes. Reminders. This is a great one. Set up a reminder system to enable the individual to be successful with choices. With technology today, it's very easy to rely on reminder systems, whether it be for medication times or time to leave for work or school. There are a lot of options for reminders. Meetings and appointments. This could be to help prepare or attend appointments. Pros versus cons. So making lists of the good, challenging, and bad things associated with different decisions. And I think that's a really big one because sort of putting it down on paper and talking through the pros and the cons allows the individual to maybe see more sides of the situation than they had been previously considering on their own. And again, it's not making the decision for them, it's presenting information. Extra time, consider the timeline in which to make a decision and if it's appropriate or if additional time is necessary. Communicating choice. So once a choice has been made, providing assistance to make sure the choice is communicated, understood, and respected. That's another big one, is to make sure that when the individual has made a decision that that's respected and honored. Technology, using phones, iPads, computers for any of the assistance. Supporters, individuals who are able to assist with decision making. And then lastly, consider values. Remember what is important to the individual and how these values may affect decisions. So what's important to me may not be what's important to you. And so even if you make a pro and con list, each item is weighted differently depending on, who's talking, right? And so just remembering that the individual is the one who gets to make the ultimate decision, and their own values are going to affect their decisions, and to respect that. So again, we saw this slide in the beginning. This is just a reminder of why we're doing the work that we're doing, is in response to the probate code, which was changed in September of 2019. This last chart here talks about guardianship and supported decision making, and it's a clear contrast between the two frameworks. So guardianship is considered a protective device, whereas supported decision making presumes capacity of an individual. Guardianship is restrictive by design. An individual's powers, rights, and authority are transferred to a surrogate. But in supported decision making, it acknowledges other practical and legal options that can address challenges and needs, rather than just transferring rights. In guardianship, guardianship should be used only as a last resort. And supported decision making asks, what does an individual need in order to be supported in making decisions? Guardianship is the most restrictive option, where supported decision making is the least restrictive option. And again, there are lots of options between guardianship and supported decision making. Those are kind of on the ends of the spectrum if you want to look at it that way. But we recognize that issues of guardianship are really personal decisions, and what's right for one individual is not necessarily right for everyone. And so we want to make sure that we're presenting all options to families. But it's important to also note that it's not just one or the other. It doesn't have to be guardianship or supported decision making, that there is a lot in between that we've talked about today, we've touched on, with other less restrictive alternatives that could be used in combination with limited guardianship to best support an individual. So moving forward, consider the following questions. What types of support does the individual need to make the best decisions for themselves? And where or with whom can the individual get these supports? The worksheet that's mentioned, when do I want support worksheet, that's something we do in our actual in-person presentations, but if anybody would like that, you can reach out to us later. And please reach out to Maine Parent Federation with any questions about any of this. It's a big topic, and there is a lot to explore here. All of our staff is trained to talk about supported decision making. And as I mentioned earlier, now our family support navigators are also trained to help assist families. So we'd love to talk with you further about this. Do you have anything left? Nope, that's just our contact information as well. Do we have any questions in any of the chat boxes?
I don't see any questions now, but why don't you go ahead and launch the poll, and I will keep my eye on questions that pop up. I'm also going to put in the chat box the email address to send requests for certificates for completion of this or for attendance at this webinar. So please keep your eyes open for that as it comes up right now. Just make sure that when you are emailing Deb Epperson, that you make sure you let her know that you're looking for a certificate for the supported decision-making webinar. And if you have any questions, go ahead and post those now and we'll get them answered for you. And if you could take a few moments to please fill out the poll. It's big for us to be able to get feedback from everybody for a couple different reasons, to make sure that as we're going virtual, we're meeting the needs and changing anything that where we're not meeting the needs. And also our grantors are always looking for feedback from us on how well we're doing. And so we need to provide feedback to them to maintain our funding. And so we'll just remain here and open until we see that people have finished filling out the survey. So as we do that, please feel free to add any questions you may have. And if you think of questions after, please feel free to reach out to Maine Parent Federation. Our information specialists are still available every day, 8:30 to 4:30 to answer questions. And we're responding to all questions via email as well.
I want to remind you guys that Dylan is going to be doing the self-advocacy webinar next Wednesday. So if you have youth who want to check it out, or as adults want to see what's going on, I encourage you to check out the link and register for that.
So we do have one question. What do you do when a person only has one parent and not friends for supported decision making? So yes, that's a big obstacle, Cindy. And what we do is we try to work with that family to try to explore some natural support options that youth may have currently that they're not thinking of. And if they still don't have many options, we try to get them involved with some groups outside of school that might be fun for them, and see if we can generate some supports in that way, shape, or form. We also do encourage, we would like the natural supports and unpaid supports to outnumber the paid supports, but we still feel it's okay for some paid supports to be on a supported decision-making team. So for example, if a youth young adult has a case manager, especially adult case managers, that would be an appropriate paid support. And then a lot of times a VR counselor for some employment support would be an appropriate paid support. Colette says, thank you so much for this information. It was very helpful. Carrie says, thank you so much. Excellent info. Mary says, your PowerPoint and presentation are very well constructed and answer a lot of questions that I brought to the event. Thank you so much. Tom says, how might you approach helping someone who probably has the ability to make decisions but doesn't have the interest? 15-year-old, so just starting transition planning but not interested in future planning and may be intentionally avoiding it. So Tom, I would encourage you to reach out to Maine Parent Federation. We can get you connected to Dylan Campbell, our youth coordinator. He does a lot of work with youth and young adults, and he can reach out to your son one-on-one. Dylan's monitoring our Facebook, but Dylan's 22, who self-identifies with his own disabilities, and he's a lot cooler to talk to than Jody and I, or everybody else who works at Maine Parent Federation are middle-aged women. Dylan has a very unique way of speaking to youth. They connect with him very well. He does a self-advocacy workshop. He does a supported decision-making workshop with youth. So sometimes hearing the message from somebody who's closer in age, and maybe encouraging your young adult to connect to some of his peers at school, but also some of his supports at school that can also help to encourage him. One of the best ways to start moving it forward is to try to have your child or young adult lead their own IEP or 504 meetings, and that guidance can come from the school. And I know with my 15-year-old son, we had his virtual 504 meeting and he was showing zero interest in coming down, and his teachers basically said he needs to come down. So I brought the computer upstairs and had his teachers ask him to come down and self-advocate for himself, and having it come from them as opposed to mom and dad helped to send that message home and helped him to get involved. But please, if he wants to reach out to Dylan, Dylan's posting his contact information for you right now. He might be the first individual that he could have a conversation with who's closer in age to him. So it's great. We look forward to hearing from you, Tom. Mary says, is information about the self-advocacy workshop available on the website, or can you provide in a follow-up email I'd like to share with a young adult in Maine? Thanks again. So we are doing the self-advocacy workshop. It is online on our website. It's also on our Facebook page. We're doing it virtually. The first virtual one is next week. I will post that information for you right now. We're also going to look to host, and feel free to have the young adult attend that one. We're also going to look to host the self-advocacy workshop for youth specifically. We're just doing it first online without really promoting it for youth yet to see how well it goes. We'll probably have to tweak it a little bit for a Zoom youth one specific to youth, but there is the registration link for the self-advocacy workshop next week that Dylan is going to do. So it's going to look and act just like it would for young adults. So they are welcome to attend, but know that at the end of May, we're looking to do one specifically for youth as well. And I think that's all right now. We're all caught up. So again, we'll hang out here for a few more minutes as people finish up the poll, but if any other questions pop up, we'll address those. Otherwise, if we've answered your questions and you've done the poll for us, thank you so much for attending today. I realize it is a beautiful sunny day, one of which has been few and far between. So please get out there and enjoy some of it. And we look forward to welcoming you to additional workshops in the future, and stay safe and well. Getting a lot of thank yous. Colette says thanks again. Ariel says thank you, Carrie and team. Kimberly says thank you very much. This was informative and helpful. Mary says great to see you, Carrie. Very well done. Thank you, Mary. And I know you saw my entire family come back and forth behind the screen. So webinars and Zoom meetings are now a norm for my family, so they pop in and out. Jody, do you have people still filling out the poll at this point? Do you see?
Oh, actually, everybody just left, so I think we're good. We're good. Yeah.
Okay. So you can take the poll down. We'll give it a few more minutes just in case there's a few more questions that pop up.
Okay.
And I think people are dropping out of participant wise, so give it one more minute or so.
Okay. Should I go ahead and stop the recording?
Yes, you can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.